Welcome to Coffee and Geography, where my guests and I geek out about the world and everything on it, discovering that we are all geographers in some way, shape or form. I'm your host, Kit, and my pronouns are they, them or she, her. So settle down with a brew, hit that subscribe or follow button, and enjoy the listen. Hi everybody, and welcome back to Coffee and Geography. And yes, I'm really excited to talk to this person. There's going to be a few topics coming up, which I think are going to be so interesting and quite surprising. I think the whole thing is going to be almost like a spill the beans kind of thing. So I've joined by Jessica Law. Hello, Jessica. How are you doing this morning?
Hello, I'm all right. I'm slightly worried that you've overhyped the encounter, but I'm plodding along on the face of the earth.
The good news is, Jessica, for you is that any regular listeners I do have, wishful thinking, but any regulars I do know that the hype, it's people like, Kid, you're such a hyper. You hype everything up.
The MC of geography.
The MC of geography. I've never been called that before. Oh, bless. Okay, so to introduce Jessica is a biology graduate, former communications officer for BirdLife International. That's pretty cool. And currently editorial assistant and educational publisher. Jessica is a science communicator who worked for a global environmental organization for several years. Also a musician and author of the popular sing-along children's book, A Hole in the Bottom of the Sea. And this has entertained children worldwide with gruesome insights into the marine food chain. Jessica's other achievements include reaching the finals of the World Snail Racing Championship. That's what's coming up, folks. Entering a song about eels in the EuroFISHion song contest. That's the first time I've read that out loud. Doing a stand-up routine about ornithology, and due to misunderstanding about the vibe of the event, attending the British Birdwatching Fair dressed as a flamingo. See, I don't have to hype anything up, Jessica.
I suppose not when you put it like that.
Oh, amazing. Now I really need to talk about what you're drinking, but, on the back of that, please tell me you're drinking just standard coffee.
I've got some chai. I've got some masala chai from Sanga's supermarket in Wolverhampton. Which, as far as I know, is the only place you can get it, and it's the best chai. I think it's imported from India, and anything even close is like £10 from a health shop, and it's not as good. So this
interesting.
This is the best.
Yeah,
So
I got into drinking Assam tea for quite a fair bit after talking to the Indian actor Adil Hussain, and it was gorgeous. And it's just because what happened, we were talking and his wife, bless him, come and brought him a cup of tea while they were talking to me. And he said, it's not very coffee and geography here, but I've got a tea, and Assam tea. And he showed me and it was like, it looks so gorgeous and golden. And so I went for a period of drinking that. So
yes,
because he was from Golpara where they grow the stuff. So
my colleague went there and brought back loads of. Oh, it's so nice. But it's every time I go home to Wolverhampton, me and my dad just go to the Sanga's supermarket and get hundreds and hundreds of boxes of this tea because you can't get it anywhere else. Well, dozens.
Yeah.
And but yeah, if I were to have coffee, I would just die. So it has to be mild, just something mild.
Fair enough. So you mentioned then you're from Wolverhampton, but you're currently in Cheltenham. So, right. So, were you born and bred wolves?
Yes, it's. I found it a really fascinating place. It's only when I moved away and then went back again as an adult that I realised how fascinating it is, because it's. Nowadays, it's a sort of a post-industrial wasteland. It doesn't get much investment and it doesn't get much attention. But it was literally the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. So beneath the ground, there's a lot of deposits of fossil, a lot of fossil deposits. There's the Dudley bug from down the road, which is a trilobite, which is named after the town it was discovered in. But there's loads of there's these rich limestone deposits full of fossils, and there's also a lot of coal from the fossilized
Mm.
vegetation. And that's what kick-started the Industrial Revolution. And the first ever steam engine was tested out in the Black Country near Wolverhampton. It's called the Black Country because of all the coal dust that just covered all the buildings and the smog from the factories, and it's it's almost like some mythical land. It's hard to explain. But when they first tested out this steam engine, the very first steam engine, it wasn't a high pressure steam engine that you would use to power a train. It was a low pressure atmospheric steam engine, which was used to power a pump. So it was to pump water out of coal mines. And this
Ah.
made coal mining way more efficient because flooding was one of the main things which hampered them and held them back through centuries. And so this is what kick-started the Industrial Revolution, and where there's lots of coal, there's going to be lots of smelting, lots of steelworks, and so it all just grew from there. And so it was really, so again, you just see geography everywhere because it's the geology of the rock and the land, and it's the archaeology of the dinosaurs and the fossil plants, and then that creates the history of the Industrial Revolution, and it just links everything together,
Mm.
which is why I love it. It's because geography just pervades every area of life.
Yeah. So would you say that there's anything about that area, the Black Country, that still lives with you now that you're living pretty much, near Bristol in Cheltenham? So is there still a bit of that Black Country part of you that you've brought in your identity? Is when you speak to people, or you talk about home, or you're comparing the people who've always lived in Cheltenham? Is there anything that kind of crops up?
Well, it's the people are really nice. It's a really multicultural area, which I think adds a great deal. It's the people are really friendly and really talkative, and I think everybody's a little bit eccentric, and they're not ashamed of that. They're not pretentious. They're not trying to, be, you know, they're not trying to be super sensible. They're just, there's a lot of creativity and a lot of eccentricity in the city, and I just think that the people are great, but the city deserves more. Basically, it deserves more
Yeah.
investment. It deserves more opportunities for people living there, and so I definitely think that sort of eccentric, creative spirit and that sort of friendliness and just I'm terrible. I'll just talk to anyone. It's really bad. And I'll
Oh.
just be sitting, I don't know, on a bus and start randomly talking to someone. I'm one of those obnoxious people. So I definitely
Oh.
think that approach I've brought with me. And the
Oh.
history stays with me as well. It's just
Yeah.
fascinating.
Oh, that's so wonderful. Yeah, and you're not actually. I can't remember who I spoke to on the podcast before, but you're the second person to have mentioned, the area of wolves and its history and it's a bit of a bit of a hole in terms of it's not getting the love and the care and the attention it deserves, because it does sound like it's got it has a vibrant history and a vibrant culture, and it's just been, it's just interesting, isn't it, how geographically places do get neglected, and we have the overheating of London, and all the investment coming down in the south and the southeast, or then we've got this bipolar thing where you get so much investment being put in places like Manchester and Liverpool, and this kind of zone in the middle seems to be forgotten about.
Well, it's I can't remember his name, but I was speaking to a performance poet actually from the Midlands, and he was saying that it's almost like it's a kind of place where people don't even believe that it's real, because
Right.
they
Yeah.
just think that there's the north and the south, and anything above, I don't know, Cambridge is the north, and anything below is the south, and there's not, it doesn't even exist. And it's like, oh, thanks a lot.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm
and there's been many
from
jokes about it. Yeah,
I'm from the land of nowhere.
yeah, yeah. There's a very good channel that I recommend to students and geography teachers called Map Men. It's a
Map
comedy channel,
man, map
but
man,
yeah, exactly.
map man, man.
Men. And they're absolutely hilarious. And there's this one they talk about the North-South divide, which is absolutely hilarious. And they go, so yeah, the North is where blah blah blah, and they have all this like stereotypes. North and the South is where people say, mahogany a lot or something like that. And then you've got this place apparently that exists called the Midlands. Ha 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 ha. And then that's it. They just move on. It's like
Yeah, and it's like I'm not allowed to be from there. Like
right.
somebody from the north is like, "Oh no, you're not north," and then someone from the south is like, "Oh, you're not." Oh,
Yeah.
this
In
whole
fact, folks,
thing.
this is true, right? And my wife, who's from America, like laughed hard when she saw this. But if you're in the south of the UK, right, and you get on one of the major motorways like the M1 or something like that, it actually says on the signs the north, right?
The
And then when you're
north.
up on the other end of and when you're on the other end of the M1, like up that end, it will actually say, south M1 south, the south, actually. Even our road signs play into that.
It
So,
makes it seem like some forbidden land.
yes, mystical forbidden land stuck in the middle of nowhere.
Well, apparently the Midlands inspired Tolkien when he was writing Lord of the Rings. Mordor was inspired by Wolverhampton and the Black Country, the
No.
industrial zone. Yes, and the Shropshire, which is the county right next to the Black Country, was what inspired the Shire. And then there's even a bit at the end of Lord of the Rings where they go back to the Shire and it's all been industrialized, and so it's sort of it's because he grew up sort of near Birmingham and the Midlands, and so it's
Yeah.
really it really sort of you can see it if you know you can really see it in the books.
You know what, folks? I don't plan these coincidences at all. But the guest, my last guest last week, we had a good chat about the Lord of the Rings because she's a Tolkien nut, and I showed her. We've got a book here that's called the Atlas of Middle Earth, and I fully recommend anybody gets that. It's if you're a geography and a fantasy geek, like it is so good. But yeah, that's just another little tidbit. I mean, this is almost turning into a Lord of the Rings podcast if we're not careful.
There's
So
another thing which has been heavily contested, but near where Tolkien lived when he was growing up in the Midlands, there were two towers, and they were
ooh.
industrial towers. There were these big chimney pipes from nearby factories, but it has been posited that they inspired. I think we're sort of going a bit too far there, though.
Interesting. I want to just have a quick chat about something that you mentioned here, which I find really, really amazing. So you mentioned London a few minutes ago, and the things that go on underground in the Black Country and stuff like that. And you said that during the pandemic, you became obsessed with Victorian stink pipes, which is the infrastructure left over from Joseph Bazalgette's 19th
Bazalgette, I
century
think.
sewage. Bazalgette. Thank you for correcting me. Bazalgette or yeah, 19th century sewage system. And I did not know this. But there are some things that look like lampposts, but they're actually to do with these sewers and these lampposts to help relieve flammable gases. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes.
What drove your obsession? Because this is just fascinating.
Yes, well, it was so the person I was with at the time was playing Pokemon Go, and the Pokestops. I don't know anything about it, but apparently the Pokestops are at local landmarks. And somebody, we were living in Cambridge at the time, and somebody had labelled up all the stink pipes as Pokestops. And he looked at this and he was like, "What are stink pipes? There's one right side outside our door." And so we ran out of the house.
Amazing.
And we just glanced, and it was just there. And I'd walked past it every day for more than 2 years, and I hadn't given it a second glance. And it was like stepping into an alternate reality. where there
Oh,
were
wow.
these things that had always been there and we'd never noticed them. So what they are, basically, I think you might know about the Great Stink. And this was something
Mm.
that happened in London in the sort of 18th, 19th century. At the time, I believe there were open sewers, sort of gutters running through the streets. People pour their waste into these. It'd all go into the Thames. And the richer people actually would literally leave London for the summer season because of the Great
Right.
Stink. And that impacted society for years, because even after it was fixed, the social season was still in winter, because that's when all the politicians and all the leaders and all the rich people came back to London. And then summer was more of a sort of a holiday season where there weren't so many social events. And that carried on
Huh.
for a really long time into the 20th century. I think there's probably still some hangovers from that. But in order to fix this, because people were getting cholera and they were getting, terribly ill, so Joseph Bazalgette decided to invent an underground sewage system, which was really successful. It fixed so many problems, but one problem that arose was the fact that there were these dangerous gases such as methane that were created
Mm.
underground. They were created from all the waste and the rotting sort of matter, and they were creating these gases that were actually incredibly flammable. And if anything, if I mean, I'm sure they were told not to, but if a sewage worker, for example, lit a cigarette down there, or
Uh-oh.
if there was some spark, something just naturally set alight, it would cause these huge explosions. And so they developed these. They were very, very tall pipes called stink pipes, and they went right down underground into the sewers. And then they're extremely tall, and they go right up,
Oh, yeah.
way. They're really tall, way above street level. And the reason for that,
Above the height of houses, because I'm looking at
yeah,
a picture of one here.
yeah, the
Yeah.
reason for that is nobody wants to smell that stench. They, that so it was to let off the gases, to sort of vent them off into the atmosphere, which worked. And in fact, a lot of them are still in use today because we still need that to happen.
Wow.
And one of the great things is that they were used as gas lamps. So, and they would be fueled from the stink from the gases. And so they just, and I think there are a few remaining ones that are still stench fueled gas lamps in London. But
Wow.
most of them have been sawn off, and they're simply, they're simply stink pipes now. But if you look at them, they're everywhere. I've seen them in loads of different towns. When I went home to Wolverhampton to visit, I realised that there was one sort of right near my house that I'd walked past my entire life, but I just hadn't noticed it. And they're quite ornate. They've got these sort of fluted bases with some sort of ornate patterns on them, a lot of them.
Yeah.
And they do look Victorian when you actually notice them. So look out for the stink pipes, and you too can step into an alternate reality of forgotten Victorian infrastructure.
And you know what's so beautiful about this as well is that you started this by saying, I was with a friend who was playing Pokemon Go. And so it just goes to show folks, all right, I'm now reevaluating whether I can let my kids do this, because actually it could be very educational for them.
I genuinely think that it can be. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not interested in it at all, but it's almost like a meta. It's augmented reality, which I find so
Yeah.
fascinating, because it's the real world with the virtual supplanted on top of it. And we found out loads of stuff. We learned loads about local landmarks, and it sort of got us out, because I'm always like, let's go for a walk. I'm really sort of quite hyper, hence why I can't have coffee. But it encourages people who wouldn't normally like to go for a walk to get out and go for a walk. And
Yeah.
so that was it was really, and in fact, I used to be a tour guide at the Black Country Living Museum, which is like a real village from the past where you can go into all the old-fashioned shops and houses and things. And there was a pokey stop in there. No, a gym. It was a Pokemon gym. And I honestly think it increased footfall. It encouraged children to come
Oh,
and
wow.
visit. So it's, I don't know. I think it has, and also it's fun. And I think whatever gives you joy and doesn't
Yeah.
hurt anyone, surely that can't be a bad thing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I agree. Well, let's go from one speed of making progress, walking with our legs, to another speed of making very much less progress. I'm trying to have a very a segue here, and I don't think it's working. And that is the pace of snails. That was a terrible segue, Kit. I'm still going to run with it.
Well, I don't even bother with a segue. Often I just jump from one topic to another at a, back-breaking speed. So, you beat me there.
So, Jessica, what is this obsession with snails and a snail racing, World Snail Racing Championship?
Yes.
Tell us more. This is, I'm missing. I'm all. Well, I know snails don't have ears, or do they?
No, they don't have ears.
So I'm not. Well, what would I say if I was a snail? I wouldn't say I'm all ears. What might I say instead?
You're all foot.
All foot.
You're all foot. Yeah, snails are a part of a group of mollusks called gastropods, which actually means belly-footed, because their foot is across, along their belly, and they're basically the whole of their body that isn't in the shell. Most of it's this muscular foot, and it acts like a conveyor belt. It's really interesting if you watch the snails when it's raining. I love watching the snails crawl up my glass window, and you can actually see the waves of muscle contractions moving from the tail to the head, and it sort of makes them. It's really hard to explain, but that's what makes them glide along. It's this conveyor belt of muscle contractions, and I can't quite work out why they're moving from its tail to its head. Like, you would think it would move from its head to its tail, but I can't work that out in my head. But apparently that's, yeah. So they're belly-footed, and I think it's quite impressive that they manage to go along even at the speed they do, because if I had to just lie on my front and sort of wiggle along, I wouldn't get anywhere. So, congratulations to them, I say.
But you've so when you did this the World Snail Racing Champ, was it because you're like, I've got to do this because of my love of snails? And did you have a snail? Was it a name? What name did it have? Did you paint the shell? I have no idea what goes on in the snail racing competition.
Okay, well, I did regional heats. So I collected a selection of likely-looking snails from around my house the night before. Honestly, the night before the competition, and I did my own snail race on the kitchen table with a safe cover over it. Don't worry, and so I sort of I did regional heats, and I got the fastest 4 snails from that heat. Now, the problem was that I accidentally got the size of the course wrong. So I ended up selecting a lot of young snails, which are very fast for a short distance, but they don't have that muscle and that stamina. So when I took them to the race was twice as long. And if you look at pictures of it, the race, it's actually in a circle, because you can't make a snail go in a straight line. And so it's almost like a dart. It's painted like a dartboard. So you put the snails in the centre, all facing outwards, and then they race to the edges of the of the table, around which we've placed lettuce leaves. So that's the way to get them to go in a line. And basically the first snail to reach the outer edge is the winner. But it's really, there were so many fouls. Like one snail climbed onto the back of one of my other snails and actually held onto his shell and turned him round, and so he was like facing the opposite direction. And it was just, some of them were trying to reproduce on the race course. It was just absolute bedlam. But I had a prize-winning snail called Moby, and he was called Moby because he was actually the leucistic form of a garden snail. So in nature, you just like in humanity, you can have brunettes and you can have blondes. So the leucistic form it's not an albino, but it's a paler form than the one you most commonly find. Mm-hmm. So Moby had this sandy coloured shell, and he had this sort of cream coloured body. And so we called him Moby after Moby Dick, the white whale, the white snail. And he was so good. He was only little, only young. I thought he was going to not have any stamina, just like in the older snails were going to beat him, but he was constantly winning the heats. He got into the finals. And somebody from Oxford actually came to the race, and we were in Cambridge at the time, and so we had the first Oxford and Cambridge varsity snail race, which Moby won. And I was so proud of him. And it was only when I was setting them all free at the end of the day that I realised the reason he was winning all these races, he was probably just trying to get out of the sun.
Oh, no.
I'd been torturing this poor snail all day. I felt so guilty. But he was probably just hurrying to get out of the sun. But they treat the snails very nicely. So this event, it's in a little village in Suffolk, and it's just a local whimsical event to raise money for charity. But it's just people just love the idea, and so this was before, it hasn't been reinstated since the pandemic, but people. It just really captured the public imagination. We had people from miles around coming. We had the BBC coming to interview people, and I was on national television talking about snails, dressed as a snail. I forgot to say I was dressed as a snail, so I had this little hat with antenna coming out of it. But you've got to, if you're going to go to the World Snail Racing Championships, you've got to commit, haven't you?
Yep.
And they treat the snails very nicely, so they're not captive snails. You're encouraged to capture them on the morning of the race and release them into the wild at the end of the day. And they're all native snails, so there's not going to be any problems with disease. And then they spray the surface of the race course, so it's this very, very damp cloth, which is very easy and pleasant for the snails because they love the damp, and they get lettuce.
That's why they all come out after rain, and
exactly. And so that's it. It was it was nice for the snails, and they were very nicely treated, and it was just a lovely, happy, fun atmosphere.
Nice. Oh, so I've just looked up the village of Lavenheath.
Yes, that's right.
Is and actually it's only a 40-minute drive from where I live at the moment. So if they ever reinstate it, I'm going to have to go take a look.
Me too. I was distraught when I found out that it wasn't on after the pandemic.
Oh wow, that is so cool.
Hi folks, a chance for you to recharge your brew, but also a polite prod to remind you that it's so easy to support this podcast. Simply liking, sharing, rating and reviewing means that it will get on more people's radar. Also, there are a few links down in the description which may be of mutual benefit. Please do check them out.
So you also have a love for eels and birds as well.
Yes,
I've seen that you
well,
read here.
yes, I think the birds thing is more a case of Stockholm syndrome.
Okay.
Because I had, I didn't have much of an interest in birds before I started working for a bird charity. I almost felt as if they were the popular kids of the natural world. Because they're really flashy and they're really beautiful and they're really easy to spot and everyone loves them, and I was thinking, oh, they're so overrated. What do they actually do that's interesting? And then when you learn about them, they're pretty interesting creatures. There's a
Yeah.
kind of bird called, my fave is the megapode. I mean, firstly, it's called a megapode. I mean, how can and it lives on the volcanic islands in Micronesia, and it actually incubates its eggs on volcanoes. So
Oh, wow.
it digs a hole in volcanic ash and it lays its egg, and then it sort of builds a mound of volcanic ash over this egg, and then it just buggers off and does its thing. I respect that. And then and so it's like a real life phoenix, because the egg gets incubated by volcanic fire. And then another thing is that the chick, when it hatches, is precocial, which means it hatches in a very advanced developmental stage. So it's basically like a small adult. So it hatches and it literally flies out of the egg. It flies from the ashes.
Wow.
And it's incubated by fire. That's a phoenix. If that's not a phoenix, I don't know what is. So
That is pretty cool.
when you learn things like that, you really, and other megapodes, they incubate their eggs using rotting vegetation and the heat that
Well, that makes
creates.
sense. Yeah.
And
yeah.
they're actually very clever. They go and put on more vegetation or take more off to regulate the temperature.
That's
So
clever.
they're really they're on it.
That's pretty clever.
So I love, I like them now. I have to
Yeah.
admit it.
Yeah.
And also birds, they're a really good example of how geography and biology interact. Because a lot of bird species, I think around 50% of bird species migrate. And I was really shocked to learn that. I thought, I knew about the swallows and the swifts and a few bird species, but not most, but a really big proportion of bird species migrate. And the way that they do so is very linked to geography. So
Yeah.
birds, they don't just all get up and fly in a straight line to where they want to get to. They actually migrate along set routes called flyways. And these are loads of different bird species. They all congregate and they all migrate together along these set flyways. And the reason for these flyways is often geographical. So, for example, a lot of birds, they don't want to migrate over the sea because, especially for large soaring birds, such as eagles and storks, birds that really rely on the thermals and the updraft to keep them gliding, they don't get the same thermals on over the sea, so they really hate migrating over the sea because they actually have to make an effort to flap their wings, and so they migrate along land, and then you get places like the Panama Gap and the Medina Strait between Spain and Algeria, where there's this tiny, tiny gap of sea, and these huge numbers of birds get funneled through this gap because they just do not want to migrate over the sea. But unfortunately, that can cause problems because recreational hunters, they flock to the area along with the birds, and there's there's loads of birds to hunt, and so that can cause birds to become endangered if they all migrate through the same small gap and hunters shoot them, then, the whole of the species is going through this one area.
Right.
You're going to get a huge proportion of that species of bird lost. So it really interacts loads of different ways. And there's also another thing that why they go along flyways is because of the rest stops. So most birds don't migrate in one fell swoop. They stop along the way at suitable habitats. And so you have these linked chains of suitable hunting grounds and feeding grounds and resting grounds where they can refuel. And then if something happens to that habitat, you just, if something happens to that habitat, then a link in the chain has been broken. They might not be able to get to the next rest stop because they're so exhausted. And the red knot, I think it loses something crazy like 50% of its body weight during migration, because it gorges on food at the start, and then and so if a bird is in that sort of, it's the line between survival and starvation is so narrow that the loss of one feeding site can cause them to starve, and it's really, and that's happened where the red knot, using that as an example, they like to eat horseshoe crab eggs, and then one time, for some reason, possibly climate change, the horseshoe crabs arriving at their rest stop on their beach, that didn't coincide with the red knots arriving there.
Right.
It was out of sync. And so the red knots didn't get their horseshoe crab eggs, and it caused this huge plummet in the number of red knots. I think it was something like a 25% plummet in red knot numbers that year, because they didn't get the food they needed. So it's really, it's all linked. It's all birds are global animals. And the reason why the organisation I worked for, BirdLife International, existed is because you can't protect a bird in one country and then let it get shot or starved or something in another country. You have to link all the bird charities together and get them to coordinate their actions and get them to sort of work with each other to make sure that these birds that move really wide-ranging animals, that they're protected across the whole world. So by the end, I was like, yeah, this is okay. This is inspiring. I admit it. Another thing is that birds use geographical landmarks to migrate. And I think plenty of people know about the sun and the stars, and birds navigate by, the skies. Some birds have ferric ions in their beaks, so little molecules of actual iron, which allows them to detect the Earth's magnetic fields, which is pretty cool. But another thing is the way pigeons migrate, which I think is really cool, because you've got homing pigeons, and how do they find their home? How do they return home? And one of the main ways they do it is actually by smell. And an example that I learned in my degree is, so say that a pigeon's loft where it lived was, I don't know, it was half a mile away from a chocolate factory, and it was 2 miles away from, I don't know, what's something else smelly? A soap factory. So what it would do is that it would use the gradient of those two smells and the proportion of them in comparison to each other to navigate from it to its home. So it would follow the smell of the chocolate factory, and then it'd be like, but I haven't reached the smell of the soap factory yet. And then
so it's like, that's too chocolatey, I'm a little bit too far west, or that's too soapy, I'm a little bit too far east.
Yes, exactly. And where it's very chocolatey and a little bit soapy, that's where their loft is going to be. So it's it's
Huh.
just they are cool. I will admit it. They're like nothing else does that. Nothing else ranges that far, apart from perhaps the European eel.
Hmm.
But yeah, that's
Wow.
that's another kettle of fish
That's another.
entirely.
Yeah. That's that was so lovely to listen to, and for folks, one of the reasons why we do this podcast is to not necessarily prove, but to appreciate that what geography is. It is this massive interconnecting, intersectional, interdisciplinary thing, which testifies to the connectivity of our world, between the human world, the physical world, the biological world, everything, and that you cannot interfere with one little piece or protect one little piece without considering how it's all interconnected. So that was just a beautiful example of that, especially with the migratory birds. And on the BirdLife International website, I've noticed as well. Actually, they actually do have this global highway map of the flyways. So you can actually see these are like the major motorways of migratory birds, and you're right how they really do stick very, very close to either the edge of the continents or they're skipping over the Caribbean islands and over the Panama Canal, and yeah, it's fascinating. It just gives you that sense of appreciation but I like to think of it as some hope, because when people say, what can I do? Or we're just a small community, a small group, we can't do anything, we don't have a bigger impact on the global scale. Well, hang on, folks. If what Jessica's just said about birds and how everything is interconnected and it has this global impact, then the same will be true for human beings as well. Don't ever think that your personal actions, your local actions cannot have ramifications positively in a global scale.
Oh, absolutely. This is something that I really believe in, because when I was working for an environmental organisation, one of the biggest frustrations wasn't people denying climate change. It wasn't people, well, I mean, that is a pretty big frustration.
Yes.
It
Yeah.
wasn't people ignoring the facts. It was people just despairing and just saying,
Yeah.
oh, we're doomed, the world's doomed, and there's nothing that we can do. And it's like, hello, we're right here. Like, what am I doing my job for then? Like, we're right
Exactly.
here. My colleagues have saved entire species. They've saved entire forests. We're working with communities across the entire world who are restoring their habitats, who are regulating and stopping hunting and changing their behaviour. And it's like, oh, well, what do we do? What's all this effort for then if we're doomed? Thanks a lot, mate.
Yes, exactly.
And
yeah.
that attitude, actually, I know that it's hard to try to be optimistic, but especially when the media often spins things in a negative way to get people to sit up and take notice and to get politicians to act. But there are definitely things you can do, and I saw that working for an environmental organisation. And for example, entire countries are switching to renewable energy. I think it's I've got this written down somewhere. Iceland and Uruguay generate almost 100% of their electricity from renewable energy.
Mm-hmm.
And if they can do it, then why shouldn't we? And, governments and energy companies, they're already investing a lot more in renewable energy. It's one of the sort of the fastest growing industries around. And, they say that as a very rough estimate, the amount that it would cost to slow climate change and to hopefully halt climate change is about the same as the soft drinks industry. When it's like, well, that's surprised. A tangible thing. That's it. I mean, the soft drinks industry is pretty big, but that's a tangible thing that you can see how much that would cost. And I mean, governments have invested millions of dollars in helping their economies to recover from COVID. I think last year they promised over $13 trillion worldwide to sort of reignite their economies.
Yeah.
And if they can do that post-COVID, then they can do that, to save the environment. It's when you actually look at the numbers, and they are big numbers, but they're also, reachable numbers, and it is possible, and I can't really explain it. It's like,
No, I totally get you.
It makes it seem possible, and it is possible. And even if the world ends, and even if it all goes to pot, wouldn't you rather have tried to do something about it? And wouldn't you rather have been optimistic and hopeful, rather than just spending your life in doom and gloom and inaction? So, I think maybe there's not enough emphasis in the media on things that people can do, and there's lots of things they can do. There's recycling and stuff, but there's also like, does your bank invest in fossil fuels, or maybe you should switch to a bank that doesn't do that invests in renewable energy, and things like, are you going to your climate march? Because it's the governments and it's the big companies that are responsible for a vast majority of this, global warming. And so, are you going to climate marches? Are you adding your voice? And so it's things like that. Are you buying a lot of fast fashion? Maybe don't do that.
Yeah, another link to last episode as well.
Is it
to Ellie? Yeah. So, but because this is my this is my day job, talking about climate change. I've been on the radio a few times and tried to and in the past when I was combating climate denial, you're you're absolutely spot on. It's now more of trying to combat the narrative of climate doomism, and I demonstrate every single time I do these kind of things. When I do talks or do radio, stuff like that, I say, look, the evidence, the science does paint a very bleak picture, but you've got to look, about what every single effort can achieve. And one of the main messages that I show is that, yes, the climate is changing to a new state within my lifetime, but within my children's lifetime, and most certainly my grandchildren's lifetime, if I ever have any, we have the possibility of having a new stable climate that is a lot safer than the potential we could head for. And having a stable climate gives us all, it gives us as humans, it gives nature, it gives us the time to start living resiliently and safely again. And that is so important. And that is worth fighting for.
That's a really good point, because a lot of what people think is, there's a certain tipping point, and once we've passed that, we're doomed. That's it. It's the end.
Yeah, it's not helpful.
It's the apocalypse. But actually, it's more like a slope where obviously acting faster will definitely be better and will save countless lives, both animal and human. But any action at any point is better than no action. And so to think, we're doomed now, right? That's it. Don't have to bother. That's that's a total. That's just not true, because it is a slope where at any action at any point is better than nothing and can reduce climate change.
Yes.
And so, I mean, I really struggled with this. When I was in sixth form and I was studying actually geography at A level, I really struggled with this, because I was just felt guilty for even existing, because I was contributing to climate change and destroying the environment, and I really was in a terrible state. And then at one point, I just thought to myself, wait a minute, if I'm this miserable and this depressed and this, scared, how am I ever going to make a difference? How am I going to get a job in an environmental organization? Or how am I going to do some good and change the world? How am I going to be sitting here talking to you about this and trying to change people's minds if I'm just frozen in fear? And I think one thing that really helped with that was to have some areas of my life that just have absolutely nothing to do with ecology, with the environment. They're just totally separate. And when I'm doing those, I can just focus on those. When I'm at work, I can, talk about the environment, and I found that really helped.
Being, allowing yourself to be human, is so important.
Yeah, and I would say that for any cause, any cause, just have something that's totally yours and that has nothing to do with any of the other socio-political things. That's just to be you.
Totally agree. Well, a lovely, lovely message, I think, to bring our chat to an end, Jessica. So we've got one last thing to do, which is to link all of our guests together using a single word or a single phrase. So what I'm going to ask you to do, Jessica, is for 30 seconds, you're going to talk about a word given to you by the previous guest, Ellie Platt, who she was given the word. What was she was given? She was given the word magic to talk about 30 seconds by Hermione Mayall, the first and the episode beforehand. So the word that you've been given for 30 seconds, Jessica, is the word thread. The word thread. And if you can tie it to your love of the world, that wasn't a pun, I just realised. If you could tie it to your love of the world, all better. So whenever you're ready, Jessica. So for 30 seconds, when you're ready, you can talk about the word thread.
Okay, interesting. Well, the first thing I would say, linked to what I was mentioned before, is having something that's totally your own. And I spend a lot of my time sewing with thread. I make my own clothes, and I often use sort of reclaimed fabric because it's more eco-friendly, and that's a really good way of bypassing, fast fashion if you've got time and can be bothered, which is not. Yeah. But I also, going back to birds as well, a migration for birds and indeed for eels, which I didn't have much time to talk about today, but are amazing. Look it up. Is there the thread that connects the whole world, and they're what keeps us working together towards a common cause. So there we go.
Yeah, lovely. Oh, so good. But you know what's so good now is that you get to come up with a word yourself for the next person I speak to. So,
goodness me.
But it's just a lovely little thing that links us all together. It's like a thread. It could even be snail. It could even be Moby,
No, this is... glide.
Ooh, it's almost like thread, so you can take it literally. We can really take it very abstract. I like that, glide. Let me make sure I write that down so I'm not.
Yeah, I'm being kind.
To the next person.
I'm being kind.
It's nice. It's nice, glide. Okay, folks. So tune in next week to see what my next guest does with the word glide. Right. So Jessica, apart from Moby, who is hopefully, who lived his best life or whatever he's maybe doing now, or maybe he's gone to the, the big shell in the sky by now, I don't know. But apart from giving a shout out to Moby, who else would you like to give a shout out to?
Oh my goodness, what, a person or just...
anyone you like, group of people.
God, this is terrible.
This is always the hardest part of the podcast.
I'm so good with factoids, but with this, it's... So I'll give a shout out to my former colleagues at BirdLife, and all the communities that they work with across the world who are protecting their habitats, who are changing their behaviours, and actually helping to make a difference.
Yeah. Excellent. Fantastic. I know that after listening to you, people are definitely going to want to connect with you. So tell us where we can find you on social media.
I am on Twitter at Jessica the Law, and I have the same handle for Instagram, and both are good for factoids. I do a lot of history and geography and science factoids over on Instagram. So that's where you're going to get the greatest wealth of fact-based content. I'm also a musician, which and you can listen to my music on all streaming services under Jessica Law. If you want to buy it, Bandcamp is the best place to do that because it gives its artists the majority of the profits from the music. And I think I'm on Facebook as Jessica Law and the Outlaws, which are my backing band. Yeah, and I would say some of my music definitely has an environmental or a nature-based message. Some of it is just it's just me whinging about my rubbish life.
Oh.
It's just totally different. So
No.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Jessica, for joining me. It's been an absolute delight talking to you, and and I hope to get to speak to you in the future. Thanks again.
Definitely.
I can hear the ghosts of those who walked these roads in years before. I can hear the countless dramas played out in between these walls. I can feel the hopes and plans of those who ran along these walls. I can hear the creak of waves arrive and leave across these floors. In the street, the ringing of the feet vibrates. Then the rain washes it away. Blank slate. And do you see what I see? Do you feel the things I feel? And are you in tune with me? Do you think it might be real? Do you think it might be real? Do you think it might be real? I can sense what one tree meant to lovers, fighters, thieves, and stones. I can find the signs of minds inscribed in stone or scratched on posts. Thoughts arrive upon the wind, I block them out and hold them close. I can thank the river bank for hosting all my favorite ghosts. In the haze, a city overlaid with days. One stone stage, we come and go away. It stays.
Thank you so much for listening. We hope you had fun. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe so more stories and experiences can drop into your favourite podcast app. If you fancy being a guest or have any feedback, follow us on Twitter at coffeegeogpod and send us a DM. Or you could email coffeeandgeog@geogramblings.com. Until next time, keep geogging.